Good morning, Connect Church, and all those other friends and relatives out there who are tuning in. How's your Monday going? I'm Charles Wolf, Director of Men's Ministry at Connect Church in Ventura, and I'm glad that you've joined us this morning. Now, Luke chapter 6, verses 27 through 31 says this, and this is from the ESV. It may sound a little different, but I think it's a very accurate version. It says, "But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. To one who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who begs from you, and from one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. And as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them." Powerful words from Jesus himself. I want to expand this a little bit. And unsurprisingly, I'm going to use a little story from my own life to hopefully illustrate this. And I'm going to start by saying something that I hope you don't take wrong. I hope you don't see it as a sign of disrespect. But my late mother was a difficult person. Very difficult. She did not have it within her to just accept and love her kids. And we would do things, especially me, I would do things that I wanted to please her, like any kid, wants to please her mom. And it was never enough. You could do better. You could try harder. Is that the best you could do? And it was brutal. And there were other issues that came up that proved to me that, well, I was never going to get from my mom whatever it was that I was hoping to get from my mom. My dad, on the other hand, I almost met him for the first time in my mid-teens when I was finally so frustrated with mom. And he asked me to go help him on a job. He did weekend jobs, remodeling houses and other carpentry-related, construction-related things. And so I was glad to get out of the house. And so we went and we worked all day together. And it was wonderful. I had overlooked this other person in my life, I guess. And all of a sudden, he became my best friend. As I grew up to adulthood, my dad and I became closer and closer. And I realized something. He loved my mom. He loved her. Also, he wanted to honor his marriage vows and the promises that he made to her. So now she became senile. And the last, 20 years of her life, she really didn't know who she was. She didn't know who he was. She knew that she was comfortable around my dad, but she would often call me by the wrong name and so forth. And my dad was taking care of her, and he was struggling with heart failure. 15 years he struggled with heart failure. And he would have an episode where he'd feel this terrible pressing pressure on his chest, and the water would build up, and he would have to go. And he had moved them carefully across the street from a clinic, and he would rush over to the clinic. He'd get her all set up first to make sure that she was comfortable and had food and a drink by her and so forth. And then he would rush across the street. And they would give him Lasix or some other dewatering drug, and they would dewater his body, and they would take the pressure off his chest. And then they wanted to have him check in the hospital and observation, and he said, "Oh no, I have to get home to my wife." I got tired of hearing that. I have to admit, and I'm confessing that. It wasn't the right response, but I'm confessing. Anyway, finally, I realized it was too big a job for my dad to take care of my mom. And she did not have Alzheimer's, so she was actually a wonderful person while she was senile. The anger, the bitterness, the resentment, it was all gone. A visitor would light up the room. I mean, her smile would light up the room when you walked in. Every day was a holiday and every meal was a feast. And she was completely lost. She didn't have a clue what was going on, but she was very pleasant. And all of the relatives who had given up on her, I feel so bad because they never got to enjoy that. But that's not my story. My story is that my dad loved her, and he kept fighting renal failure. He kept fighting heart failure. He kept fighting and had to get home to take care of mom. Well, I moved them into our home. We set up a little 2-room apartment in the back of our house and moved them in. And I began to take care of my mom alongside my dad. And it was such a relief for him. It was also very healing for me because I never heard her say, I'm sorry. I never heard her say, I love you. I never heard her say, thank you for all this that you're doing, because she didn't understand. But I began to understand why my dad was such an example. And I began to wonder, was I going to be able to live up to the example that my dad gave me? Well, he ended up in the hospital, and the doctors were saying, this is not one of those times where we can patch him up and send him home. He's in renal failure. All of his major organs are beginning to shut down. And they said to me the thing that I have said in counseling to many people who have struggled through a life, an end of life for a loved one. And they said, say whatever you haven't said. Let him know whatever you think he needs to hear, because it's not going to be long. Well, I went in to see him after talking to the doctor and having that conversation with the doctor. And I said, Dad, they're telling me that you need to be ready to go see Jesus. He said, well, I am ready to go see Jesus. And that was, of course, a relief. And he was. But he said, I'm not ready to give up on mom. I got to make sure that. And I said, I'll take care of her. She's my mom. I will care for her until the day she dies. Don't worry about it. And he made me promise. He wasn't worried about himself. He wasn't worried about anything except his wife, the love of his life. What an example. When I finally convinced him, firmly holding his hand, looking deeply and straight into his eyes, and speaking loud because he was very hard of hearing, I think the entire floor of the hospital heard me promise him mom would want for nothing for the rest of her life. Don't worry, I'll take care of her. And when he finally accepted my promise, he never spoke another word. He laid back and he sighed. And the hospice people came in and they cranked up the morphine and they began to make him as comfortable as they could. And 3 days later, as the sun was just peeking up over the horizon, with myself holding his hand, my wife was there, and a favorite niece were there, he went to see Jesus. And he wouldn't have done that. He would have kept fighting, except I promised him, this woman who had made my life so hard, I was going to take care of her. Well, I did. We ended up finding out I was having a hard time because she got very sick twice. And so we set her up for a care facility, and I visited her a lot, and I tried to remind her of her life. She wasn't able to grieve the loss of my dad, but finally she went home to be with Jesus too. And I look back at her and I think of this passage that Jesus says, love those who don't know how to love you. And I realized she taught me the ultimate lesson. She taught me the lesson that my dad loved her and I need to love her. And I did. And I did. And it changed my life. Those who can't love you, sometimes it's not because you're bad. And sometimes it's not because they're bad. Quite often, it's just all they can do. I had a friend years ago, and he sketched this out. This was so long ago, it was on an overhead projector, if you remember those. And he put it up on a screen, and he had a picture of two birds, a mama bird and a daddy bird. And they were standing on the edge of a nest up in a tree branch. And in the nest were 2 or 3 little mouths. You know how the little birdies put their mouth up, open up, and they're begging for food. But the parent birds, the mama bird especially, had a broken wing. She could not fly. So all she could do was sit there and look at those babies, and she couldn't go get them food. And I thought, wow, that was my mom. And my dad adored her. How could I do any less? That's all I have for us today. You know I love you. I'll see you next week.